Hi, I'm Eva Mezo, a minister at First United Church in Waterloo. We have this tradition in our family where New Year's Eve, we look back on the year and we sort of name the worst of it and the best of it. And many years ago, my mom was with us and she cited a hike that we had gone on, myself and my daughters, who were about 5 or 6 at the time. She was in her early 70s. And this hike that we had gone on when we were in Newfoundland visiting my younger brother. It was a beautiful spring day, and my brother had a home right on the ocean in Conception Bay. And so I said, why don't we go for a walk? My mother and my 2 young daughters. And so off we went. There was a nearby valley that had a river flowing through it that connected to the ocean. And a couple of days earlier, I had walked along the ocean, the shore there, and noticed that the river went into the ocean and you just sort of stepped over this tiny little trickle of a stream. And so on this hike, I thought, well, why don't we sort of make a horseshoe shape as we walk along the shore, and then we'll sort of walk into this valley and then back out and along the shoreline again. And so off we went, and it was a beautiful walk. But we were more than halfway through when all of a sudden it started to rain, and we had these stairs ahead of us, and at one point we were standing on someone's porch trying to keep dry, but we realized that the rain was not going to stop, and so we persevered and we pushed ahead, and we finally got to that point where that, as I had remembered it, little stream met the ocean, and it had turned into a small river. And so there I was with my 2 young daughters jumping over the stream or the little river and leaving my mother behind. And so she said that she felt overwhelmed by the challenge of making it home, but she managed to get over that river, and we walked stumbling on all of the pebbles, wet pebbles on the shoreline, and the wind and the rain that had turned into hail, and we made it home. It was much more of a challenge and an adventure that any of us had anticipated. In the stories today from the Bible, there are 2. One is Jesus inviting the disciples to come and follow. And I wonder whether the disciples had any clue to what was to come, the kind of adventure that was about to unfold for them. Sure, they thought Jesus was this charismatic guy, somebody who had lots of energy and zest about him and, was going to shake things up. But they had no idea how their lives were going to change. Or the story of young Samuel, who in the night hears somebody calling his voice and thinks, oh, it must be Eli in the other room. And so he shows up and he says, here I am, Lord. And Eli's like, go back to bed, I didn't call you. And of course, this goes back and forth a couple of times until finally Eli realizes that it's God that's calling Samuel. And so Samuel goes back to bed. And the next time God calls him, he says, here I am, Lord, and I'm ready to do your work in the world. But of course, he too has no real sense of where that's going to take him. We often don't. We make our plans, we live out what we have experienced, what we expect, based upon what we know, our experience. And so it's hard for us to step out of that into this other realm of experience. In the gospel stories, we see Jesus, for example, making plans to cross the Sea of Galilee and spend some time away from the throngs of people, just with his disciples. And when he gets across the Sea of Galilee, all of a sudden, there are tons of people there waiting for him, ready to hear him preach and teach. And so Jesus has to change his plans. He looks at them and realizes that he can't go along as he had planned, but he needs to respond to what it is that is there in front of him. And so to follow God's call requires the willingness to see what is in front of us, and ears to hear what is happening, and a heart that feels with those around us. I was reading about this surgeon, cancer surgeon, who was seeing a therapist because he was disenchanted with life, disillusioned, cynical, and had sort of fallen into this depression. And he said to the therapist, every day it's the same problems over and over again, and I don't think I can do this. I think I need to go into early retirement, even though he was very good at what he did. And so she said, you know what? Let's give something a try. Let's see if we can change your perspective. And so she asked him to start keeping a journal, and at the end of the day, to answer these 3 questions. What surprised me today? What moved or touched me today? And what inspired me today? So 3 days later, he calls her and says, okay, you've got to give me some sort of trick here, because this isn't working. Every day I'm just writing nothing, nothing, nothing. He said, you've got to give me some sort of tool here to get me going here with these answers. And she said, okay, what if you look back on your day and imagine that you are a novelist, or a journalist, or maybe even a poet, and see what you can come up with. And so they continued to meet, and they talked about stress management. They tried to lessen his workload, and he seemed to be doing better. And it was about 6 weeks after that phone call that he came into their next meeting, and he brought his journal with him. And he said, you know what? This is actually what is making the difference. When I first started, I would look back at the day and I would think about how, the cancer had either shrunk or grown, and that's what has surprised me, or that a certain trial medication was working. But as time passed, the things that I noticed were different. And when I noticed them also changed. I no longer noticed them at the end of the day, but I actually noticed them in the moment. And when that happened, I actually started really experiencing the transformation, because I was changing my relationship to people. And he said the first time was with this woman who was 38 years old, and she had abdominal surgery for cervical cancer, and she had gone through very rigorous cancer treatments and had been really ill from it. And there she was in my office, sitting in a chair, and she had her 4-year-old daughter in her lap and her 6-year-old daughter standing next to her. And they just looked beautiful. They were so well cared for. I could tell that she loved them so much. And so after we talked about her symptoms, I just said, you are an amazing mother. Your daughters look so cared for and so loved. That energy that has given you the strength to continue to care for them through all of this is what's going to carry you through the next little while. And she thanked him and said, that means a lot, what you just said to me. And she smiled. And he realized that he'd never actually seen her smile. It was then that he started asking questions that he'd never learned to ask or was never taught in medical school. Things like, what helps you get through these days? And it was amazing how people responded, all of them differently, but from the heart. He was always a very successful surgeon, But now he'd had relationships with his patients, and he had people coming and thanking him afterwards, and he even was given presents. There was one particular present. A present was given to him of a stethoscope with his name on it. And he realized the metaphor, perhaps it was irony, that he finally learned how to listen to hearts. And so it is when God asks us to embark on this journey of open eyes, open ears, and a feeling heart, that we're guaranteed a life of adventure. Amen.